And we're live. It looks like I'm in the dark. I'm not, but I certainly won't be leaving you in the dark about what I feel about today's subject because it is time for me to say hello and welcome to another fun filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today I want to talk about one of my favorite genres of music, or perhaps I should say a subgenre of soul music, and that is Philadelphia soul, the sound of Philadelphia. And it's the kind of sound where even if you might not have heard the name Philadelphia Soul, or even if you don't necessarily know what the name means, if you've been anywhere near an AM or FM radio over the last 55 years, you will have heard some of the songs by some of the artists in this genre because there were many, many, many chart toppers, mostly vocal, some instrumental, all very unique. So, what is the Philadelphia sound? Well, it's a subgenre of soul, but it's very different than a lot of other kinds of soul music. It's very light in the drum department. Yes, the drums are there, but they're very low in the mix. They're very laid back. Instead, at the forefront of the mix are incredibly lush orchestral arrangements, lots of strings, lots of brass, but often played in a almost neoclassical style way. The singing, obviously, very harmonic, very lush. It's definitely not. It's sort of the if James Brown sort of invented the modern mainstream soul sound, which was heavy on the drums, heavy on the bass, very staccato in the brass. This you could think of as the total opposite. And when I just run through the name of some of the groups, you'll know exactly what I mean. So I'll start with my absolute favorite of all of the Philadelphia groups, and that is the Stylistics. The Stylistics, absolutely just wonderful, wonderful group. You've heard probably their biggest hit, "You Are Everything and Everything Is You," with the notable electric sitar, which is another feature that wasn't exclusive to Philadelphia Soul, but a lot of the arrangers of that genre loved their electric sitar, which went really well with those lush string arrangements. You hear it also on the Philadelphia Soul song "You Make Me Feel Brand New," also Stylistics. The Delphonics, another great group. Check out the Delphonics theme, which is an instrumental number, one of the most beautiful things you will ever hear. Just soulful, neoclassical in many ways. Just so unique, and but they had many great songs. Obviously they too were a vocal group, and I would say that tied in my top three, because they're, depending on my mood, they're one of the best vocal groups ever, Blue Magic, and the song Sideshow in particular. What a wonderful song. And it was very popular throughout the 70s, popular still, on radio stations that still play this kind of music. I say radio stations, but you know what I mean. Playlists is what I should say now. But just a wonderful, wonderful band, Blue Magic. And there are others, the OJs, who had a lot of hits. They were a Philadelphia soul group. Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, and of course, Teddy Pendergrass, who was their sort of co lead vocalist, became a huge solo artist in his own right. When it comes to great sort of instrumental music, as I said, things like the Delphonics theme, others, they were instrumental hits. MFSB, Mother, Father, Sister, Brother, were a Philly soul band, and they had some huge instrumental hits as well. The Three Degrees had a lot of hits. When Will You See Me Again? One of the female Philly groups, very, very popular. The Spinners, incredibly, incredibly popular. I'll Be Around, probably one of their biggest hits, but they had so many number ones at the time. And of course, well, sort of vocal groups backed by this lush sound was sort of the hallmark of this movement. You also had a lot of solo artists who came out of this movement, like Patti LaBelle, particularly Billy Paul, who retained this sort of arrangement style throughout his career. Now, Phyllis Hyman, one of my favorite female vocalists ever, and I've done a standalone video on her, while she really was her own her own woman and did lots of genres that had nothing to do with the Philly sound. She did come out of this sort of musical tradition, as did Lou Rawls, even though he obviously had many different styles of arrangement through his career as well. Then you had the Jones Girls later on in the 70s, who were great. The Tramps, really good band, known for Disco Inferno, but they had a lot more than that. The Times, Thymes, really, really great as well. And one of the things that made this sound of Philadelphia soul so consistent is you had a group of arrangers, a group of producers, a group of songwriters, the most prolific of which being Tom Bell, Thom Bell. Not that spelling matters, it doesn't. But he was absolutely prolific and wrote so many of the best songs from the Delphonics, from the Stylistics, so many great ones. And a lot of these bands, or vocal groups, if I want to put it more accurately, they were somewhat anonymous. But Russell Tompkins Jr., the lead singer of the Stylistics, who's still around, his voice, that sort of falsetto that just came so naturally to him. He I think I would consider him a superstar in his own right, even if he's not necessarily a household name. And so another thing that came up, because when someone asked me literally just before I went on there, oh, what's your video going to be about today? I said, well, I'm going to talk about Philadelphia Soul. And I was reminded that of all of the great American orchestras, the Philadelphia Orchestra in the first part of the 20th century, notably under Leopold Stokowski, was my favorite of all the great American orchestras. And yes, New York was great, particularly when Mengelberg was there, though Mengelberg's greatness was more associated in my mind with the Concertgebouw. Chicago's been great over the years, but I've always thought Philadelphia was the king of all the American orchestras. And it has been associated for much of the 20th century with a very lush sound, particularly under Stokowski, where there was a lot of beautiful portamento in the strings. And so it got me thinking, is the Philadelphia soul sound at all related to the Philadelphia orchestra sound? And in a literal sense, I wouldn't say so, because they exist in different musical universes. There's the world of popular music, in which, mainstream pop, rock, soul, country, and western, and everything else sits. And then there's the classical world, which, if this seems overly binary, you have to understand that this derives from the sort of pre-commercial age of pop music, when there was the art world, because art music is what they called classical music before the term classical became more common. And then there was folk music. So there was the music performed for the sake of art, supposedly, and the music performed for the sake of the people, the folks. And folk music eventually became pop music as it became professionalized, because one of the things that differentiated art music from folk music is that the artists making the art music were expected to be paid, initially by an aristocratic patron or by a church, and then later by a publisher, by ticket sales, etc. And Wagner was one of the people that really helped to modernize the classical or art music world. At the same time, though, the sheet music industry, which didn't really exist much before the 19th century, blew up and became a huge, huge sector. Self-playing instruments like player pianos and player organs became really big, and then eventually recorded sound caught on, as did the radio, and thus was complete the transition from folk music to pop music. So bringing it back to Philly, the Philadelphia Orchestra and the Philadelphia Soul Sound, they exist in these two different spaces, which have been different going way back to the folk art divide. But I do just wonder if some of these artists who grew up in Philadelphia would have had some of that lush sound associated with the Philadelphia Orchestra, mainly under Stokowski, but also under Ormandy, where the legato strings remained, though the portamento I love so much was greatly diminished when Stokowski left, as frankly was the adventurousness of the conducting. Stokowski was just in another league from others. But I do wonder if some of these people who grew up in Philadelphia, who were listening to the radio, going maybe with their school to these concerts, would have heard those strings and said, let's apply something lush and legato to contemporary soul music. And it could well be. And this, as because tangents are quite interesting on YouTube and sometimes in life, not when you're ready to deliver a baby, I suppose. But in all other instances, they're quite interesting. It got me thinking about how much different the cultural life of big cities used to be not all that long ago. Not all that long ago, kids would have been taken to see an orchestra if they lived in a big city, went to school in a big city, and they would have enjoyed it, even if they came from homes where that kind of music wasn't ever played, let alone discussed. Think of great civic places where people could hear music for free. Things like, and this was true of the private sector as much as the public sector. And let's stay in Philadelphia, the Wanamaker organ, the biggest organ, I believe, in the world, or certainly one of the biggest. And this, of course, was in Wanamaker's department store. Now, this was a business. This is the private sector. They survived and made a profit by selling shoes and shirts and dresses and perfumes and all the rest of it. But if you just wanted to stand in the lobby and listen to the beautiful organ play as the shoppers did their thing, you could. And that was a civic experience. And the private sector once was willing to say, we can have something big and attractive to draw people in. And we'll take the risk that not everyone will buy something so long as enough of them do. And that was the kind of thing that really made the world work. When people were looking at things on the balance of outcomes, as opposed to crunching every number and saying, right, we need to make airlines uncomfortable by having more seats in the same size plane. Look at that organ, it's taking up space. We could be selling more things made in Taiwan or China or other places. And it's just something gradually happened where free markets and commerce devolve, let's say, into hyper financialization. And this really hurt the arts. And it hurt people being able to experience the arts as kids, because kids don't have money, kids don't have ideas, kids don't even have a brain. That's a good thing because it means that they can build all of those things. And what builds a child's brain? Well, exposure to things that inform you about what beauty and excitement and fun and all of these various emotions we get from music and other forms of art, what it gives us. And Wanamaker's department store, it changed hands and later became a Macy's, but until 2025, or was it 24? Until super recently, because I watched the closing live on YouTube, people could just go in. They would say, "Meet me at the Eagle," because they had a big Philadelphia Eagle, which is spelled Eaglese. I told you the spelling would factor back into it. See, tangent again. But they would say they had this big at the floor, on the floor of Wanamaker's department store. They had the big Eagle. So people would say, "Meet me at the Eagle," and they would hear the organ. And so, how does this relate to Philadelphia? So, well, Philadelphia was one of those cities, and it wasn't unique for a big city at the time, where young people, even if they had no money and even if they had no real instruction about go here and listen to this, go here and listen to that, they could be exposed to this great music just because they lived around it. And even many medium-sized cities or towns had similar experiences. Cities are dying today. And, the left blames the right blames the left, but both sides really have a lot to blame. Different sides did the work at various eras. Today, it's obviously the left who are in the spotlight because crime is now legal, meaning it's unenforced. Sometimes it literally is legal. The streets are filthy. The philosophy is that it's good to do drugs and destroy your own life and become violent towards others. That's a human right, as opposed to the human rights of the people who want to have the human right to walk down the street in peace, let alone the human rights of a junkie to get cleaned up, whether he wants it or not. So that's what's happening today. And before, it was the right who said, let's cut all of these music programs, let's cut all of these sports programs. The taxes still can continue to go up, and the world became a less educated and less enlightened place. So every side has something to blame because ultimately they don't really serve anything civic. But the private sector, going back to that, people like Mark Wanamaker, or I wasn't Mark, I could be getting his, but let's just call him Mr. Wanamaker. People like that who decided, I just don't want any department store. I want a department store that's like a castle of the arts, a living, breathing sort of Athenian temple of the arts. People like that existed. And it kind of seems hard to believe right now because today's billionaires are just so uninspired and uninspiring. Uh, and their products are frankly very unoriginal. All of the cars look alike. All of the electronics are not built to last. The architecture of today, you can absolutely forget about it. It's so bland that you can't even hate it. At least some of the mid-century stuff, which some of it was great and some of it wasn't. But even the stuff that people tend not to have liked in hindsight, like brutalism, at least it was making a statement. Today, it's just all so bland. Where you did have people that said, right, they took pride in the fact that my concert hall, my privately owned concert hall, is going to be more beautiful than all of the others. My department store is going to have more live musical performances than any other. People used the arts to sell a product, and in so doing, they gave the arts both to their customers and to those who just wandered in. And the people of that time, when it was a more moral society, which it was, would have said, "Why? Some kid who comes into my store might not be able to afford anything today, but maybe he will in 10 years. And how will he remember this store when in 10 years he wants to buy a shirt? Because of the free organ concert." People actually used to think like that, and they don't anymore. And perhaps that's why a lot of the music today all sounds very generic, where things like the Philadelphia Soul sound, even in a country that was highly connected electronically, trains, jets, the saying, all of those various forms of transportation. Even in a place like that, you had regional styles based on the fact that cities and localities had their own unique orchestras, their own unique organs, their own unique choirs, their own unique everything, their own unique museums, where now just everything is so the same. And yet, some people might say, oh, it's old man staring at it, screaming at a cloud syndrome. And I'm not saying that you cannot experience great things today, because the counter argument is the internet is the ultimate form of experience, where anyone who can log on to an internet connected device can see and hear just about anything from anywhere. So the selection, obviously, whether it's YouTube or Spotify or the Internet Archive or any of this other stuff, the selection itself is greater than it's ever been before. There's more music on Spotify to hear than in any record store. There's more artistic stimuli available on YouTube than walking down any city street. That isn't an argument. And I do think that is a very good thing. But I also think that sometimes the haphazard and accidental real life encounter with the arts, as opposed to an algorithmic but random encounter, I still think that at least at the beginning of one's journey into the artistic world, that has a kind of merit that we've lost. And frankly, we lost long before the internet, because crime was made legal and the arts were defunded long before the internet was a household name. So that's the tangent that we went on. But if you want to relive the best of Philadelphia Soul, check out Blue Magic, the Stylistics, the Delphonics, and any of those other great groups I mentioned. It really is a unique genre that I believe has stood the test of time. As always, like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.